The Portrait of a Lady is a heartwarming pen portrait of Khushwant Singh's grandmother who brought him up. Her simplicity and beauty left an indelible imprint on the writer's mind. Hello everyone, welcome to English Tutorials by Poonam Thakur. In this video, I will be summarizing the story The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh from Class 11th English Course CBSE book Hornbill with the help of a mind map. The Portrait of a Lady is autobiographical in nature as it describes the author's association with his grandmother and changes that come about in their relationship. It is a loving tribute from a grandson to his grandmother where he reminisces about the emotional bond he shared with her. On reading it, the readers are forced to evaluate their own relationships with their grandparents and to reflect on the reasons for the growing isolation of the elders in families. Khushwant Singh was an Indian author, lawyer, diplomat, journalist, and politician. He was born in Punjab on 2nd February 1915 and received his education in Modern School and St. Stephen College. He graduated from Government College Lahore. He studied law at King's College London. After working as a lawyer in Lahore High Court for 8 years, he joined the Indian Foreign Services upon the independence of India from British Empire in 1947. As a writer, he was best known for his sharp secularism, humor, sarcasm, wit, and abiding love of poetry. His notable works are The Mark of Vishnu and the Other Stories, The History of Sikhs, Khushwant Nama, The Lessons of My Life, etc. His novel A Train to Pakistan, based on turmoil and trauma of partition of India, has been made into a full-length feature film. The title of the chapter, The Portrait of a Lady, is appropriate. Besides being a pen portrait of his grandmother, the story is Khushwant Singh's loving tribute to his grandmother, his relationship with her, and the emotional bond he shared with her. He graphically describes the person and the personality of the grandmother who had all the attributes of a lady. The initial part of the story is set in rural Punjab, India. Khushwant Singh describes the village school that was attached to the temple and how with his grandmother he would walk to school along the narrow lanes of the village. The next part of the story is set in the city after Khushwant Singh and his grandmother moved there to join his parents. The story speaks about the life of an old lady who is the narrator's grandmother. We see the struggle of old age and a peaceful acceptance of solitude. The grandmother does not express her feelings and is always content with everything that happens in her life. The story revolves around the author and his grandmother and their changing relationship. It beautifully describes the relationship shared by grandparents with their grandchildren and how the feelings fade gradually as the child grows up. The story also describes the contemporary lifestyle where relationships fade as all get busy with their own lives. The old generation suffers the most as they need time and attention. Moral of the story: the story puts light on the need of companionship and friendship felt by our elders. It also shows how love and emotion is experienced not only by human beings but animals and birds too. There are two main characters in the story, Khushwant Singh and his grandmother. Khushwant Singh, the narrator, describes his association with his grandmother and talks about the emotional bond he shared with her. He pays loving tribute to her. The grandmother is the main protagonist in the story. She's a picture of beauty, peace, and contentment. She's described as old, wrinkled, slightly bent, short, and fat, with silver hair and always dressed in spotless white clothes, a picture of winter landscape in the mountains. The story is divided into three phases, which I have explained in detail through this mind map. The story begins with Khushwant Singh reminiscence about his grandparents. He remembers his grandmother as an eternally old person. She was old, fat, slightly bent, and hobbled around the house telling the beads of her rosary. He had seen her look the same for 20 years, and to him it seemed that she was really old and could not grow older. Khushwant Singh finds it difficult to conceptualize that once his grandmother was young and pretty. The stories about her childhood games were like fairy tales to him. Her silver white hair used to spread out on her wrinkled face. She was always dressed in spotless white clothes, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayers. She was like the winter's landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. His grandfather's portrait was hung on the wall of the drawing room. He looked 100 years old with grey flowing beard. Looking at his portrait, one could visualize that he had a lot of grandchildren but could not imagine him with wife and children. In the first stage of the story, Khushwant Singh lived in the village with his grandmother as his parents left for the city. They were good friends and she took good care of him. She woke him up in the morning, got him ready for the school, coated his wooden slate, prepared his breakfast, and accompanied him to the school. The school was attached to the temple, while Khushwant Singh and the other children sat in the veranda learning the alphabets and morning prayers. The grandmother sat inside the temple reading scriptures. After they had both finished, they would head back home. On their way, she fed the dogs every day with the stale chapatis that she carried with her. The turning point in their relationship came when they shifted to the city to be with author's parents. The only thing that remained unchanged was their common bedroom. The author went to school by bus and studied English, science, and music. Thus, the grandmother could neither accompany him to the school nor help him with his studies. Another thing which disturbed her much was that the children were not learning about God and scriptures in the school. Instead, they were given music lessons, which was not a respectable thing in her belief. To her, music was not meant for gentlefolk. It was meant for beggars and harlots only. She despised the music lessons. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. Later, when the author started going to the university, he was given a separate room in the house. The common nexus of their friendship was broken. She accepted her seclusion with resignation. The grandmother became more reclusive and spent the entire day sitting by her spinning wheel and reciting prayers. The high point of her day now was the half an hour she spent feeding breadcrumbs to sparrows in the afternoon. When the author decided to go abroad for higher studies, she accepted it with quiet stoicism. She went to the station to see him off and kissed him on his forehead. The author cherished the moist imprint as the last sign of physical contact between them, as he was going away for 5 years. Given her age, the author was unsure if he would see her again. But the grandmother received him at the station 5 years later and was delighted to see him. There was no change in her. She did not look a day older. In the evening, the grandmother collected women from the neighborhood and sang for hours of the homecoming warriors. For the first time in her life, she missed her prayers. The story ends with grandmother's death. The next morning, she was taken ill. The doctors reassured the family that there was nothing to worry about. It was mild fever. But grandmother said her end was near and she stopped talking to anyone. As she lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads, Even before anyone could tell, her lips stopped moving and rosary fell from her hand. Her body was laid on the floor, covered in a red shawl. Thousands of sparrows came and sat quietly all around her body. The author's mother threw breadcrumbs, but the sparrows took no notice of them. They flew away just as quietly as they sat once the body was taken away for the last rites. On this slide, you can see the complete mind map of the story, The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. Through this, I have given you a complete overview of the story, and I hope all your doubts are clear and you have understood the story thoroughly. Thank you so much for watching right till the end. Please do give your feedback on the style and contents of the mind map. Like, share and subscribe. English Tutorials by Poonam Thakur.